Hazarika. I'm with the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. I've been asked by Vikas, our good friend, to moderate this session. I'm rather interested that this is the same room where I spoke about the NRC in April. And I'm very glad to see a very full house. I'll take a minute to basically introduce the panel, each of the panel, and also to introduce the structure of the discussion, because it'll be slightly different to what I think happens at APU. Each panelist will speak for 15 minutes, after which I'll open it up to the floor for questions and comments, and please keep your comments and questions brief. After which the panelists may have a minute's time to respond, to add anything that they wish to add in addition to the Q&A, and then I will wrap up. Now, very briefly, I'll go by the order of speakers. Bimol Akoijam is somebody I've known for a very long time, very passionate, not so young. Young, but not so, younger than me, but not so young. Professor at JNU, a good place to be still, I think, battling away. Well, you're still there. After the flood, we're still there. It's okay. He is with the Center for the Study of Social Systems, is a very, as I said, passionate political scientist, focuses not just on issues related to the region, but on social and political psychology and cultural studies, which, undergirds the work he does and brings truly a very unique perspective and nuanced approach to the issues of the region and the larger engagement with the rest of India. He is directed a short documentary film, and he is, I didn't know you made your third fiction film.
One feature film and one documentary, another is...
Yeah, and has directed Azadi ki Khamoshiyan. So, Bimol, over to you. Bimol is threatening to go over there and lecture us. Teachers can't be restrained.
Problem with that. I think I feel it very suffocated to speak while sitting in that place. Thank you, Sangeeta. And thank you so much for inviting me. This is very rare occasions that I get a chance to be in Bengaluru and to experience one of the private universities that have been much talked about in India, and we know a couple of them in NCR regions. Many of my former colleagues have gone there and joined. What I shall do is that set up a fundamental framework where we can have some discussions and our anxieties. Let me start with something that well-known philosopher and political theorist Hannah Arendt once remarked about the nature of human rights. He says, if you look within the idea of human rights, which is the parameters through which we talk much of it, and Sangeeta is part of that now, human rights is all over. Hannah Arendt's position is something like this. The idea of universal human rights is exposed by the figure of the refugees as nothing but citizens' right. There's nothing like a universal human rights, and fundamentally what we talk about human right is nothing but citizens' right. It's something that is being granted and made intelligible within the system of a state, or as we say today, nation-state system. And we're able to grapple with this reality when we look at the figure of the refugee. They will have certain kind of humanitarian treatment, which is the state is supposed to provide to them, but not the full right of the citizens. So if his universal human right is something applicable across, then you will see that they will not be distinguished from the citizens of a country, the national citizens, so to speak. And therefore, in this sense, when we discuss about citizenship and citizens' rights, then we need to know that there is in the background the idea of the nation state. And then quickly, if you run through that, we know that nation and state are two different concepts and entity, but they are sort of inextricably tied together since the French Revolution. When in the third article of the French Declaration, when it says that the sovereignty, which is essentially a juridico-political concept, has been invested to a psycho-cultural concept called the nation. The third article of the French Declaration says sovereignty shall rest with the nation. So that's how nation state, and we continue to think that all the members of UNO are nation states. Hence the name is United Nations Organizations. And practically and technically speaking, this is not the organization of nations. It is organization of states. So it should have been United, States Organization. It's the organization of state. The assumption is that all the member states are nation state. So this is crucial for us to discuss when we discuss about NRC or any other issues. So that's the first parameters. What am I saying is that when we discuss about the idea of citizens and human rights and so on, which comes in our discussion on this issue, they are rooted in this system of nation-state system and a situation where two ideas called nation and state have been sort of clubbed together. That's why it becomes a hyphenated uses, nation-state with a hyphen. This is the first propositions and the parameters through which we can understand the issue. The second one is to distinguish the concept of citizenship or citizens, the idea of citizens, one as a legal concept. The other is much more problematic conception of citizen as nationality. Okay, so citizens in technically legal sense, it is somebody who is a member of a state as a legal concept. So you, in other words, you have a passport and you are a citizen of that state. The other side is the citizens also, they say, is often conceptualized and colored with this idea of nationality. So you said, which nationality are you? I remember when Emerson, this American writer, once said it, we live in a world where you can think about a man without an eye, man without an ear, and it doesn't sort of disrupt your sensibility that much. But it's almost revolting for us to conceptualize a man without a nation. You must be belonging to some nation is what we assume today, even though we know that the idea of nation states is barely 300 years or so old. And in countries like India, as Ashish Nandi Cole said, it came here riding piggyback on imperial colonial expansion of the European power. It's not something that original in this part of the world. You know that Tagore have never bothered to translate the word nation when he writes about nationalism, wanting to ensure that this idea nation is alien to us. Ironically, he was very skeptical of that idea of nation, and we call him national poet. He writes the national anthem. Gandhi, who is very skeptical of state because he knows that it's rooted in violence, and he thinks about village republic as an alternative to this hegemonic, machine-like institution called state. We call him father of the Indian nation state. That's the irony of this place. I was talking, in fact, in morning this. Now Sangeeta will say this another lecture in classroom. Ironically, when the Indian army goes to fight with Pakistan, to build up their patriotic fervor, they sing a song written by the national poet of Pakistan, Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan, which is one of the marching band of the Indian army. That's the irony of this place. So when you think that this particular nation, citizenship as nationality, which is going to be loaded with cultural ideas. So it's very different from a legal conception of citizenship and a cultural sort of conception of citizen as nationality. This is where I would like to enter, about CAP, Citizen Amendment Bill, or national, this NRC, issues. Prime Minister said in one of his remarks on CAP, and it's very crucial for us to understand, He said, which is more important? I'm not reproducing in verbatim, but the word in verbatim is like this. One part is that he said, the phrase he uses, color of the passport versus color of blood. Which is more important? So when you conceptualize citizens and citizen amendment bill, and when he's trying to set the color of the passport and color of the blood, you have an idea of that citizen in a national sense, colored by a notion of a national, not merely a legal construct. Passport is a legal document. It is the legal understanding of the word of citizenship. So you said, don't border by these places, Bangladesh or Pakistan's, by blood, they're Indian. And we must welcome, this is their home. Look at the phrase, home, blood. These are the metaphors which leads to a very organic conception of a nation. We know as a student of social science students, there are two general typologies of nation in the world. Broadly speaking, there are nuanced differences among them. One we call it German model, which is a cultural nationalist model. Folk which speaks a common language constitutes a nation. It is an organic conception, like my body is indivisible. So nation is indivisible. And it flowered into Nazism. You try to clean the body of the foreign elements within that. And that's how the genocidal violence. And in particularly, I remember a book by Michael Mann, a well-known political sociologist from the US, a very well-known book called The Dark Side of Democracy. It's an organic conception of nation often leads to genocidal violence. And remember that, so when you think about color of blood versus color of passport, you are deploying the idea of citizenship deeply, deeply mediated by this cultural nationalist idea. So Pakistan is only a legal, it's an epiphenomenon. It's not deep-rooted. Deep inside is we are all of the same blood. This is their home. You should give right to these people. That's the notion of citizenship. It is this organic conception which mediated the idea of citizenship, where the Northeastern will become the other. These are Chinese-looking guys. In fact, Patel wrote a letter to Nehru on 7 November 1950, where he says, these guys have a pro-Mongoloid prejudice. And many authors also refer to as, on the Mongoloid fringe and so on. So these are racially and organically speaking, the other. You have also a profound way in which Muslim, which is implicated in all this debate in NRC or the CAB, there is an otherness of Muslim in this country. I'll give you an example. In 19th century Bengali nationalist Budhe Mukhopadhyay once talked about Hindus as born of the womb of Bharat Mata and Muslims were her adopted children. Difference between adopted children and the born of the womb. It's a very biological metaphor. That nationalist imagination continued to mark the Muslim as the other in a very organic sense. And later on in the Hindu rites, I produce it as, that in holy place versus Janambhumi, So for the Hindus, this is a place where we were born, and this is our holy place as well. These guys, they have a split in that, so they cannot be fully national. So who is a national citizen in this country is mediated by these ideas. This is something that I want to flag up when we discuss. You will continuously find why Muslim is located in that, why Northeasterners are very skeptical and apprehensive of CAP. These are part of these particular ideas around that one. It's not merely a legal, universal human right discourse which dictates. Deeply mediating the debate is this unstated, rather now it's this upfront, that you have this color of the blood, idea of a nation, and it is what is we're going to do. 2 more minutes or 1? 5 more minutes? Enough then. I'm almost done. So in this sense, okay, so what I'm trying to end is, if you understood this, so when we're discussing about citizenship right, then we need to know what I have distinguished between legal concept and a national concept. Citizenship in the two sense. The other is that we have a context of nation-state system within which the idea of the nation mediate the debate, and that's why refugees are the refugees, and how citizenship is going to be treated differently within a given nation state. Legally speaking, Manipuris, the Kashmiris, the Muslims, or any minorities are Indian. Nobody can question in the legal sense of the term. But there is always a lurking question mark on their membership as part of this nation. If you move away from this purely legal framework, goes into certain cultural conceptions of the idea of the nation state. So Muslim becomes the adopted children, though Mukhopadhyay did make a point that Bharat Mata loves both of them. And it is an idiom that we are familiar with. After all, when you remember Lord Krishna, you don't quite remember Devki. You remember Yasoda, who brought her up. Or Kavi Khushi Kavi Gum, if you see Jaya Bachchan's character, and it's been played out in cultural idioms. I teach, by the way, right now a course called Cinema and Culture in India in this semester in JNU. So we've been discussing about this. So it's not very unfamiliar idioms for us. So they did deploy that Bharat Mata loves both of them. But your loving is one part, but the distinction as one biologically rooted, one adopted, troubles the thing. Even Nehru had a Freudian slip in his discovery of India, where he says that, he defines composite culture, blah, 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 Hindu as a religion and all this thing. Then he makes this point that the Muslims and the Christians have adopted, the word is adopted into the Indian ways of living and thereby become Indianized and become Indian. And I often wonder if Indian culture is composite, thereby meaning you have imbibed from the Chinese, from the Greek, and from the Arabs and everything, then why is that the Hindus are not required to adapt to the Indian ways of life, which is a composite culture, and thus Indianize? Why Nehru misses that line is a question. I have written about this in one of my essays called Indica to Bharat via India. About this one. This is a Freudian slip in Nehru. So there's a deeper cultural streak in the way we imagine India. That is coming up. So what happened is that because of this organicity, this is my last point, we think we are one nation, one language. There's a lurking desire for this. Let's remember Sanskrit Commission Report 1956. If you wanted to look at it, you will see it's exactly the German model of one language. Sanskrit as the embodiment of the Indian spirit, blah, blah, blah. Article 351 in Directive Principle, which talks about Hindi as the medium of expressing the composite culture of India and stuff like that. So we have been haunted by this European idea of nation in the cultural sense, and we have this desire for one language, one people. But the fact of the matter is, India is not. If today most of us remain silent on Kashmir, so my suggestion is, imagine yourself being locked up in your room, switch off mobile, not because of your voluntary by others, for a day, and see how you feel it. What makes this silence more palpable in India, whether it's not about the right wing, it's inside us, each one of us. That's what nationalism does to us. You think that they deserve it. You think a fellow citizen, while you're claiming that they are Indians, but they deserve this, is what we think. And that's what nationalists hold over us. So don't point fingers only at the right. When you point fingers at the right like this, 3 fingers points at you, and it's important for us to remember this, what nationalism has done to it. That is exactly why Tagore was very scared of nationalism in the first place in his essays. So if India is like this, but let's think it the other way around, India is not like this. To cut a long story short, when you have Queen Victoria's proclamation in 1858, India was broadly divided into 2. British India, directly ruled by them, and princely state, ruled by the Maharajas. They tried to bring this thing together since 1920 onwards, 21 Chamber of Princes and so on. 1935 Act was the first time you have a document imagining a federation of the 2, which was formed during this Queen Victoria's proclamation, just after Sepoy Mutiny. It could not be implemented. Round table, it was there, second round tuck, but it collapses because the Maharaja keep on insisting what would be our place in this federation. Surreptitiously, that was invoked in the form of an instrument of annexation, and people became part of this one together. So it's not born out of a one unit. It is coming together of many, which produces this nation. We forget. We continue to think that it's an organic one entity. So what happened is that Kashmir is a signal of, or reminder of the fact that we came together to form. It's not one entity which was split into different union. Manipur, and this is my last remark, was a kingdom of that kind with an 11-gun salute state. It had a law of Foreigner Regulation Act, which is also called a permit system, whereby you regulate the entry of foreigners, could mean the British, the Burmese, or today the Indian mainstream population coming into it. That was scrapped in November 1950 after the Constitution of India came into force. And the definition of Manipur in Indian Constitution even today says it's a territory which used to be administered as the Chief Commissioner province under this name Manipur before the commencement of this constitution. That would mean that Constitution itself recognizes that Manipur as a geopolitical entity existed before the Constitution itself. So that are the signal of history, how India became what we are. We are not evolved from here as amoebas. We come together, different culture forms. India is because of that. So a unitary notion of culture is mediating the idea of citizenship, and that's the whole debate. And this idea is not only about the national level. Naga nationalists, Manipuri nationalists, Ahomia nationalists, all of them replicate this idea of a nation, of a European kind. So I call it ghosts of colonial modernity. You fight, you speak the same language. It's like women's who are protesting against men who have insulted or done some kind of a sexual assault on them. To humiliate that man, you say, make him wear sari and bangle. You don't realize that you are reproducing the very structural meaning which produces the violence to begin with. It. So the so-called resistance to the Indian nation state also use similar vocabulary. And it is within these parameters we can respond in some of these concerns on NRC and so on. Thank you.
But yeah, we'll live with this. So some of the, I didn't want to go into any detail of, we introduced the issues before I think Bimol sort of plunged into them. I think it was very important for us to hear directly from a scholar his own concerns and his worldview. But these are issues that raise passions and they raise the temperature in the room. I know about this room. But certainly back home, they create controversies. You're either on one side or another, with people conveniently forgetting that there are no binaries in this. It is a very complex region. There are many multiplicities. And, it's been the issue of national debate, especially on what you call national television. I don't think there's anything called national television. It's just these metro media channels. And I think it's extremely important to that we have our three colleagues here to speak on issues both from the ground and from the perspective, because one of the points that Bimol often makes in his public addresses is the issue of nazar. It's all about perspective, that while we are being observed, you're also observing the other. And I think it's very important for us to understand that how we are seen or how we see others, there is a process which is also coming at us, And whether it's the NRC or the, what Therieh is going to speak about, the RIM in Nagaland, or the Citizenship Amendment Act, these are all not acts of theory, but actions which are actually being influenced by one perspective, in a way, while negating the many diversities which exist on the ground. When Vikas and I were discussing the idea of the panel, we drew up this short bio, of the panel, which you would have seen. The anxiety about the issue of indigeneity and control over land and other resources, which is marked in different forms, like around the NRC in Assam, And there are demands even in this state, in this city, for an NRC, for detention camps. I don't know who they're going to put there, but in Nagaland, you have the RIN, which is being spoken of. In places like Manipur and also in Meghalaya, there are demands for an inner line permit, reintroducing an inner line permit. Apart from the NRC, the inner line permit is also a demand. And for many of you, as I was saying this morning in class, if you wish to travel to Nagaland and to Arunachal and to Mizoram, you will need an inner line permit to actually go there, where you state your nature of business, your name, your father's name, and have a photograph and pay 25 rupees as a deposit to get into the state. So, these are issues which are of deep concern because they also reflect the nature of the state. They're very reflective of where the state positions itself and where people are, and how the perspectives are certainly not matching. I'm going to ask our next panelist, who is from Nagaland and has been very deeply involved in civil society movements and activities in Nagaland, Theja Therieh, who is also associated in a way with the peace process with the Naga groups. He's currently the president of a very representative group from the Chakesang community. It's called the Chakesang Hoho. And he is vice president of the Northeast Forum for Indigenous People. And for many years, more than a decade, he's been campaigning on the issue of census data, something that both Vikas and I have been working on for some years in Nagaland. And the floor is yours. Do you want to speak from there? Or? Okay, you set a very bad trend.
I express my happiness, greetings, and gratitude to the Azim Premji University for giving us this opportunity. This is my second time. The first time I spoke on the census, how much it affects the people of the region. And this time is about the registration of indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland. Faculty members and our co-panelists, they're all well-known persons. I'm the only one who is from the grassroots. I want to speak on the position and the situation on the ground. And hopefully it will match with them in the process of our interaction. I will read, because if I talk, I might cross the limit. So I will just read the small preparation that I have. Indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland. Registration of indigenous inhabitants. The idea is not to drive away others who are not indigenous. It is a process that will identify and that will register, so that we will get to know who are the categories of citizens in the state of Nagaland, because we have certain privilege, we have other developmental and other proportion distribution that are required to identify people, and also so that provisions will be distributed because of our ground situation. The erstwhile British India failed to subdue and colonize the total Naga areas, except the erstwhile Kohima, the headquarters, which is presently Mogokchung, Kohima, Phek, Zunhuboto, Peren, and Dimapur. These districts are covered under this. The other 4 districts, namely Mon, Tuensang, Kifiri, and Longlem districts, were placed under unadministered area in the erstwhile NEFA, that is Northeast Frontier Area. The occupation of British in India was very brief and was very temporary as well. No permanent infrastructure was established by them, except for few small bungalows and race games, depending on the necessities. The Nagas were independent, as no other force had ever conquered them by force or even by goodwill, and Nagas were never made a subject to any rulers. The Nagas survived through the ages with their traditional mainstay, which is agriculture. During the primitive age, where the Nagas were not exposed to outside world, the people were dependent on others only on two items, that is salt and iron. Though salt was locally produced in the later stage, and then it remained inadequate, and also the iron, which is obviously very scarce item. Nagas by nature are independent, and every individual work for its sustainability on our own. Our economy depends largely on agriculture product and land resources. This is one reason why land holding becomes indispensable, and we cannot imagine life without land. Words from the native African that reminds us today our position of the Nagas today in Nagaland. I'm not sure whether land or the people come first. That is what he said. And yes, I'm also sure that land and the people are inseparable. They are synonymous to each other. The Nagas too felt that we are inseparable with our land and its resources. If the land is taken away from the people, then we are left with nothing. Our land is a part of us, that is our belief, and it is within us. And we defend our land and its resources with our life. That was the situation. Nagaland's Land and Revenue Amendment Act 1978, which received the assent of the governor on 29th of 1978, amended the Assam Land and Revenue Regulation 1886 and extended to the whole of Nagaland state to protect, preserve the land that belongs to the indigenous and vulnerable citizens of the state. The subsection 2 of the Act stated, notwithstanding anything that contrary in the law, usage, contract, agreement, no person other than the indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland shall acquire, possess by transfer, exchange, lease, agreement of settlement of any land or any areas constituted into belts or blocks in contravention to the provisions of subsection 1 of the Assam Land Revenue Act. Subsection 3 of the Act that stated that from and after the commencement of Nagaland Land and Revenues Amendment Regulation Act 1978, no document evidencing any transaction for acquisition or possession of any land by way of transfer, exchange, lease agreement, or acquisition, or possession of any land by way of transfer, exchange, lease agreement, or settlement shall be registered under the Indian Registration Act of Land Registration Act of 1908. If it appears to the registering authority that the transaction has been effected in contravention to the provisions of subsection 2. This is the law that we have today. The Nagaland Village and Tribal Council Act 1978 had categorically empowered the village council the village council is the smallest unit of administration to be the custodian of landed property. But Section 15, subsection 1G, which read, no transfer of immovable properties shall be effected without the consent of the village council. Written record of this shall be maintained by the village council. So in keeping with this principle envisaged above, registration of indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland, we call it RIIN, has the core meaning to our very existence. Identification of indigenous inhabitants in the state of Nagaland is paramount, therefore, to protect our unique identity, culture, and our very existence from the external threats. The policy of RIN is misunderstood by few, as though it is an exercise that is going to be discriminatory to certain section of people. Yet, the exercise is within the parameters and the rights envisaged in the Constitution of India. RIN is all about protecting the fundamental rights of the bona fide citizens of the state of Nagaland, irrespective of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, color, or creed. By this exercise, the state of Nagaland will streamline the status of citizens. And those who are not indigenous inhabitants will be classified under domicile. And everyone will be included in the process. For that matter, no one will be left. Nagaland is born out of political agreement, as we all know, and we are still under political negotiation with Government of India. That will determine our future status and position. At the moment, Nagaland cannot comfortably go along with the rest of the states, even if NRC is announced nationwide. Therefore, RIN is the best transitional mechanism of identification in the line of our ancestral ownership over land and its resources, and to maintain our identity, culture, and our way of life. Nagas are the ancestral land owners in their respective domain wherever they inhabit from time immemorial, and they are original and aboriginal inhabitants, the first settlers in their respective geographical location. Ethnic Nagas belong to the same homogeneous group, and today we have 14 Naga tribes, namely Chagesang, Ao, Angami, Chang, Kemungam, Konyak, Lotha, Rengma, Puchuri, Pom, Sumi, Sangta, Mipchinger, and Zeliang. That are the tribes in the state of Nagaland. As a Naga, we have our common political aspiration to be independent, to live under one administrative jurisdiction, and no one can deny this inalienable right of the Nagas. And today, Government of India also recognized this position unambiguously. However, Nagaland is a state under Indian Union, and today the Naga tribes of Nagaland are indigenous inhabitants in the state of Nagaland. We have two other non-Naga tribes, namely Kacharis and Kukis, which are recognized scheduled tribe in the state of Nagaland. And members of these two communities who are qualified by the notification that is laid down in 1977 are indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland, which has given a cutoff year that whoever are a permanent settler, permanent of Nagaland prior to the state formation, that is the 1st December 1963, are indigenous inhabitants. Other minority groups, Nagas, whether it's Nagas from outside Nagaland or non-Nagas, who settled permanently in Nagaland prior to the 1st December 1963, whose name is there in the first electoral list, the 5th of December 1963. These are qualified under the notification, are the indigenous inhabitants of Nagaland. RIN is a process of registering the indigenous inhabitants, and to identify the inhabitants into different categories in the master list of inhabitants and stored in the digital locker of the state as a real-time record to do away with all the certificates which were issued rampantly in the past, which cannot be, which are not in the record as well. We need authentic and correct statistics to enforce public security and rights, also to implement government programs and policies, and also to maintain accountability and transparency in governance, for the RIN becomes the principal reference for all other statistics. And that is the reason why the Nagaland is going through a process of consultation as to how this registration will be actually realized, and this will be the principal reference for all other statistics that is available, all that may also be available in future. So this is the exercise. I will not go beyond this point at the moment. Thank you.
For that, I mean, this raises, and I'm sure in the minds of all of us, this raises many questions which I'm sure will be addressed, and both Bimol and Sangeeta, who's going to speak next, will address them perhaps in, Sangeeta may address some of them in what she says. But the whole question of indigeneity, who is indigenous, who is not, who came before somebody else, whether, like for instance in Assam, the whole issue of cut-off dates, you know, that's been such a bugbear to defining the issue. Whether somebody came before 71, before the creation of Bangladesh to Assam, after that he's a citizen, before that, after that he's, you know, he's not a citizen, or she, but before that they are citizens, okay. In the rest of the country it's 1951. So there are the concepts of indigeneity and citizenship which are coming up now, as both Bimol and Theja have mentioned, are issues of great concern and very, very divergent. It's not one size fits all, and these multiplicities are what create the dynamics of negotiating so difficult. I'm going to ask Sangeeta, who's our third and final panelist, to speak now. Sangeeta Barooah Pisharoty is a deputy editor of The Wire. She's somebody whose work I followed with great interest over many years, and she was earlier a senior correspondent with The Hindu, a special correspondent with The Hindu, and has been writing not just on the Northeast, but on a range of issues relating to these very topics over a period of time. And for those of you, and I assume all of you are good, voracious readers, I recommend her latest book, which is Assam, Accord and Discord, which has just been published by Penguin Books. And Sangeeta will talk to us. I think she will reflect on some of these issues, as well as the criticality of what's called citizenship in the discussion we're having. So.
Good afternoon. Thank you, APU, for inviting me. Bimol has spoken about citizenship, going away from the legal parameters. I would like to focus more on the legal side of it. And basically, the NRC issue has been reported widely in the media, so I would not like to go back to the context. Unless somebody has any specific questions later, we can take it up. Okay. What I try to look at is what happens after NRC. Now that the final NRC has come out, is that the end of it? There's some over 19 lakh people are out of it, and then they have to go through another judicial process with 3 layers of it. So is that the end of it then? Because when NRC started, the entire context was that everybody, all the stakeholders were looking for some form of closure. Because the Assam agitation was a very divisive movement also, from 1979 to 1985 when the Assam Accord came out. And even the Accord, the signing of the Accord also led to a lot of political divisions. We talk about the formation of the Assam Gana Parishad as the political party, but there was another political party that has happened, which was opposed to the Accord. So these things have happened. And so let's come to what happens after the final NRC. So now what we understand is that all these over 19 lakh people will have to go through the foreigners tribunal process. And if they fail, then we don't know what happens to them. Why I insist on this is that whether are they going to be sent to the detention centers, because that has been the trend so far. So we don't know what is going to happen to them. So after that, of course, they'll have to go to the higher courts, which is the High Court and the Supreme Court. So that brings us to another complicated issue. Assam, as you know, has got a separate cut-off date for citizenship, which is March 24, 1971, but which is actually the 6A of the Citizenship Act, 1955. So, but before the Assam Accord was signed, the Citizenship Act had already set a new cut-off date for India, which is July 1st, 1987. So for the rest of India now, if you look at it, that India has a July 1987 cut-off date for all Indians. I mean, whoever's born in India, it's not looked at anything else. Whoever's born in this soil is an Indian. So, and then for Assam, there is March 24, 1971. So, now the NRC is being updated on the basis of this cut-off date. So if you go to 6A, it talks about two citizenship dates. One, of course, the January 1st, 1966, which is the base year for citizenship in Assam, as per the Assam Accord. And then they say that whoever has come, say, after January 1st, 1961, till March 24, 1971, they'll be registered. And then their citizenship will be, their voting rights will be cut off for a period of 10 years. They'll get all other rights except voting rights. And then after that, they will become citizens. So this is the 6A. So, but Section 3 of the Act is in contradiction to it. So it says that 1st of July, till 1st of July 1987, whoever's born in this country is an Indian citizen. After that, of course, there was a couple of more amendments, and one amendment said that if one parent is an Indian, then the descendant is an Indian citizen. Then after 2004, which is crucial because there the Indian Citizenship Act brings in the word illegal immigrant. It says if one parent is an illegal immigrant, then the child is not going to be an Indian citizen. And now when we go back to the Supreme Court's various rulings in the NRC case, if you see that that section of the illegal immigrant section of part of the Section 3 have been taken into cognizance. And that's why you will find a lot of children are not there in the final NRC, which was published on August 31st. So that means the Section 3 was taken into consideration in the case of Assam too. So if Section 3 is taken into consideration, and which is in contradiction to Section actually 6A, which is meant for Assam. So this brings us to another important point, which is, again, I'll go to the Supreme Court order on August 13, the last order that you can say about on the NRC issue, on the NRC case, which said that this NRC is going to be updated depending on the order of the judgment of the 5-judge Constitution bench, which is going to be formulated by the Apex Court. And so now what is that Constitution bench? There are about 13 to 15, questions that has been set aside by the Supreme Court to decide on the validity of 6A and the validity of Section 3 also, whether it's going to be applicable in as the case of Assam or not. So that means by now 1,600 crores of taxpayer money been used to update this process. 55,000 employees of Assam government were used for so many years. And all the development work was stopped because they were all busy updating this register. And it just kept so many people out. So now the thing is, where are we? Are we, so that means the Constitution bench is the ultimate deciding factor. It has to first decide whether if 6A is going to be implemented in the case of Assam, then what happens to Section 3? So now at this point where we are is that you may not be the citizen of Assam, but you can be citizen of India. So we are in that position right now. So, so it needs a lot of interpretation. It needs a lot of questioning. I would actually look at Supreme Court too, because when you bring out this kind of a thing and you say, hurry, hurry, bring it out quickly, we need it, no more dates, no more extension. And then when we come to the nitty-gritties, we see that actually the most fundamental question has not been answered yet. So this is where we are in terms of what happens post-NRC. So, because another thing is, like, people will go to the foreigners' tribunals now. The number has been increased to 222 now. And if you listen to the government of India, which says still very soon going to raise the number to 1,000. So even to form these 222 foreigners' tribunals, they had to relax the rules to find the people who are going to head these tribunals. So who are the people who are going to head these tribunals and decide people's citizenship? They are the lawyers who will have at least a minimum 7 years of experience in the court, in any court, and of 35 years of age. So earlier, the requirements were minimum of 55 years experience, a senior lawyer, or retired judicial magistrates, or kind of that level. Here you can even, bureaucrats are going to now also decide someone's citizenship. But in the rest of India, we have, these cases are decided by courts, by proper courts, by not quasi-judicial bodies like the tribunals. So this is a very important question now in front of us, that who's actually going to decide the citizenship, the base level. And this brings to mind, we should also look at why these tribunals were brought in. Tribunals were brought in Assam in 1964 through an executive order. And why was it necessary? Because Assam, if you, I don't know how many of you know that, this problem in the citizenship issue in Assam is a very old one, starting from partition, There have been this Immigrant Expulsion Act, which was passed by Parliament only for Assam. And if you read the act closely, you see that it was actually to give a kind of a protective shield, kind of a, to protect the Bengali Hindus who were coming from the other side. But that act was also used to push out a lot of Muslims, because in Assam, the Muslims of Bengal origin certainly supported the Muslim League's idea of a Muslim country, but post-independence, they didn't go. They didn't go to East Pakistan. Stayed on. So we talk about, when we talk about the partition, in the national perspective, we don't include the Assam, but Assam it must be a very important part of, actually should be included in the partition narrative, because Assam too was divided. We don't talk about that. Like Sylhet division of Assam got divided and it went to East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh today. But Sylhet went, but the Sylhetis didn't go. Many of them came back. And they were actually moving within the province. But the old anxieties between the Assamese and the Bengali speakers, so that led to a creation of another narrative, which we see now also not, still alive on the ground. And then of course another thing that came up was the PIP scheme, and where through that, it was a complete creation of the IB and Nehru's trusted B.N. Malik, who brought this entire program to Assam, and because the borders were open and the relations with Pakistan on the western side was very tense, but it was not lost on the government of India that that side of the border is also Pakistan border. So this whole scheme was brought in, and on the borders there were a lot of surveillance, and that's how the Assam Border Police Unit came up, which is so notorious now in, that was the context. And then when they were pushing people in through the across to the other side of the border, so Pakistan objected to that and said, we'll go to the United Nations if you continue to push your Indian people in your own citizens as ours. So that was the context why the Foreigners Tribunal came up. So government of India wanted to avoid to internationalize this problem, and then they said that we will make these people go through a judicial screen, kind of a quasi-judicial body, and then they can be proven to be not Indians or foreigners or coming from that side, so we'll push them on. So I'm not surprised that the foreigners' tribunals are producing a lot of foreigners, because if you see the context, it is that. But now the context has changed, because a lot of these people are saying that they are Indian citizens. So they have papers. So then the government is yet to decide on the proper SOP to how these things are going to be, how these tribunals are going to deal with these cases. Because already certain documents have been decided under the Supreme Court's observation that these are the things you show to prove your citizenship. But you failed already in the NRC. So that means, are there going to be more documents that these people can show when they go to the tribunals, or are these the same documents? So, and another big question is that if you have failed as per 6A of Citizenship Act, but you may certainly pass under Section 3, under Section 3 of the tribunal. Okay, so these are questions in front of us now, and yes, but another big issue that we also need to quickly look at before I stop is also the rights of the smaller communities. You have to see Assam issue. It's a very old issue, and also related to migration. Because Assam has today the largest number of smaller communities, tribes and all of the entire country, if you look at, the largest number is in Assam now. So people are and they're completely rooted to their land. So this issue is also, it also needs to be looked at from that point of view. What happens to the host community then? So this narrative doesn't come up, but it is an issue that you find on the ground. What we see now is only a communal Hindu-Muslim issue. That is primarily because the mainstream media is also pushing that, or international media is also looking at mostly that. It's why? Because they're looking at it as a BJP-ruled state. People may have voted for the party. When I go onto the ground, talk to people, they voted for various other reasons, but not for this. So the majority Assamese community also don't want to see this issue as of now from the communal point of view. So there is a contradiction there as well. And lastly, I just want to also flag that, particularly the international community and international media, what we see is like when this whole NRC thing was building up, it was also compared to the Rohingyas of Myanmar as, producing stateless people. I contradict, I don't support this for one reason, that if you look at the history of the people who call themselves Rohingyas now, and Rohingya concept came only in the 1960s. Earlier they were early Chittagonian laborers who were brought to Myanmar by the British. So you also see this migration of the Muslims of Bengal origin happening in colonial Assam. So the history is very similar, but they also supported the Muslim League's creation of a Muslim country. But post-partition, the politics are very different. Among the Rohingyas, you will find a separatist movement, the demand for a separate region with Sharia law, but you don't find it among the Muslims of Assam. Their stories of assimilation. They speak about, they have actually adopted Assamese in the census report. So it's a very different thing. They have never been separatists. So I have a little problem when people identify these two as the same. So it's not. Thank you very much. If there's any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Sangeeta. I think we're doing pretty well for time. We have another 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, even more. What I'd like to do is, I'd like very briefly to not go over what they've said, but pose at least a question to each of them, and then I'll open it up to the House. One is, I think it's important in the perspective of what Sangeeta has said, also to look at the larger issue. One of the larger issues is, as she talked about, the problem or the challenge of migration. Because in India, I think we conflate and confuse the issue of migration with illegal migration or informal migration. I mean, the Constitution actually enables anybody within the country to move anywhere in search of work, education, that's a fundamental right. But we confuse what an informal or illegal migrant is, which is somebody from across the border, with somebody who's been perhaps internally displaced by flooding, or somebody who, as Bimol spoke about, a refugee. And the three are very different groups of people, and I think there's a lot of mixing and confusing of this, partly because of the categories or the groups of people, unfortunately, who tend to come in these groups. The second is that as far back as 1946, the problem of settlement, shall we say, from what was then East Bengal in Assam was a political issue. It was something flagged by the Congress party under Gopinath Bordoloi, and it was seen as part of a policy by the Muslim League to essentially enable Assam to be absorbed in East Bengal and eventually in East Pakistan. It was because of Bordoloi, the Congress party, and Mahatma Gandhi in that alliance which basically prevented this from happening. So that fear, I think, is almost like at the back of the mind of many people in the region, that something like this may happen, a demographic change which could lead to something like this. Whether that fear is justified or not is not the issue, but it's there. So I just like to put one question to each of our panelists. One is to Bimol, because you did speak of prejudice informing policy, as it were. How much do you see of that in the areas that you're looking at, whether it's nationally or with the region? That's one. To Theja, I'd ask you, where does the RIM play into the CAB issue? Because the Citizenship Amendment Bill has drawn a lot of opposition in Nagaland, and does the RIM actually play into that narrative, or is it really opposed to it? And to Sangeeta, one of the things that you weren't able to reflect because of time constraint is also the fact that although people may be off the list, the government has suddenly taken this proactive stand on saying that we will help everybody to get on the list. We will provide you legal aid, and you are all citizens until proved otherwise. And this is a complete contradiction of what it had been saying until the previous day. And nobody seems to be picking them up. And the other thing is that Bangladesh is never going to accept anybody who's sent across the border, because they say there are no Bangladeshis in India. Why would they come to another poor country? They'll go to Malaysia or other places, to the Middle East. So deportation is not even an issue for Bangladesh. So this whole thing about we will pick each person up and throw him across the border, it's not going to happen, because there is no other country on the other side of the border to accept that. So if you could just briefly reflect on this, and then we'll open it up to the team. You don't have to go there. No.
Now this is answering, okay. I think, I said it, I was trying to look at the idea of citizenship. I said there are two ways in which it is understood. One is colored by idea of nation. There's another is a pure legal category. What has been coming up? Why is it the BJP come and talks about CAP, for example, and replicating NRC across? I think it is because in their ideological parlance, it's a national idea of an organic kind is determining. That's very clear. In the CAP case, Modi was very clear the color of the passport and color of the blood. And this is their home, and so forth. Or Bhagwat saying recently that none of the Hindus will go back. Will ensure that, after the NRC. So it's very clear from their pronouncement that there's a particular idea of India, a particular cultural nationalist project is being there. Along with this, the whole sort of replicating everywhere, even in Karnataka and so on, is also part of their ideological track. There's this famous political and legal theorist called Carl Schmitt, a very problematic figure, but supposed to be one of the most brilliant minds the 20th century world has seen. He has this short essay and became much commented in political science called The Concept of the Political. And he says if we had to define economics in one line, it would be profit and loss. Aesthetics is about ugly and beautiful. Ethics is about right or wrong. So what is political? Then he goes on to argue that the concept of the political is nothing but the decision that distinguishes friends from enemy. And that is very much commented upon, and then people think that the intellectual fervor of Nazi project was given by him and so on. This ideology is rooted in us versus them. Are you with us? If you disagree with us, you're anti-national. If this whole dichotomous of it's been manufactured within now, and juxtapose it with the foreign and much talked about and much hated across political spectrum, Pakistan, and I think also not without reason, for obvious reasons. And this ideology, so NRC replications and citizenship, is also mediated by this ideological trajectory of us versus them, the same kind of an ideology. So in that sense, it's a national phenomena, and this debate is guided by that. As far as the local manifestations of that one, ironically, and he has already touched, right from the Assam Accord onwards, you have this 6A being introduced. There's already a contradiction in the Citizenship Act, first deadline in 1948 and so on and so forth. So you have this graded citizenship, and what is that? You can be an Assamese, you can be a non-Assamese, but you can be an Indian citizen, as you said. That irony was already introduced in 6A already, and the kind of that is following up. My last comment is, why did I say that this whole vocabulary of nationalism is reproduced even among the so-called resisted, whether it is the Nagas, the Manipuris, and everywhere. Marathi Manus in Maharashtra in different forms and so on. They have also this idea of indigeneity, and so you have rightly raised how long a person is going to be in a place to be called a native. It's a universal debate. even in globally speaking, the idea of indigenous, why government of India takes a different position on that is because it is rooted in a Western experience and their narrative about immigration and to settlements and so on, but it cannot be applicable in other parts. That's why some of the countries like India takes a different position on the question of indigeneity. So who's indigenous and not is going to be a problem. In this, my last comment would be this, but we also must understand one part. What's happening in Karvi Along, for example? Look at the census. What was the percentage of that tribe in the 40s and 50s and what they are now? What is the percentage of Tripuri population? What's happening to them now? What will happen to Manipur? I said often, population of Karol Bagh in Delhi is almost near about the population of Manipur. So a few thousand people from Manipur in Bengaluru or in Delhi is not going to change. It's like putting a glass of water in a pond. But if you bring a bucket and try to put it in a tin, you will know the effect. So what happened to this? So if India is a multicultural society, it is the moral and political obligation of the Indian state to ensure that these people survive. They are not overwhelmed. And then Tripura is one after 1971 census that sparked of Assam hesitation, and it has repercussions in Manipur. So we have another larger issue of what could be the mechanisms to ensure that indigenous people or these smaller cultural, even if we remove the word indigenous, how to ensure that they can survive in the system. And I think that also raises, is implicated. We cannot turn a blind eye to those anxieties.
Thank you.
Okay. The specific point, I don't know whether I'll be able to satisfy you. Nagaland state, when it was created, we were given protection in the form of our land, our natural resources, the protection given to our culture, tradition, identity, all these were given under Article 371A. And then our lands will also be given protection through this article. And then we have 1978 Land and Revenue Act, which was amended from Assam Land Revenue Amendment Act. After which Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation Act 1873 was also given to us to protect us, our culture, identity, and the undesirable assimilation of people from mainland or elsewhere because of our fragile and then vulnerable situation, because of which all these protections were given to us. Today we are doing RIN, Registration of Indigenous, so that we will identify every citizen in the state. And then we will be able to enforce this Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation Act, Inner Line Permit, we call it. It cannot be enforced, especially particularly in Dimapur, because Dimapur is flooded by people from outside. About 3 to 4 lakhs are there, outnumbering our own Nagas.
It is not a protected area.
Dimapur is open. Yeah, no ILP. Yeah. The same way now, the case of Tripura, the indigenous Tripura, I think they are about less than 30%, yeah. And the people, immigrants coming from outside, they have taken over the political power and everything. So this is the fear that we do have. And this is why we need certain protection. In order to see that our protective laws are properly enforced, we are doing this.
Bangladesh was formed. Lot of Bihari Muslims were not given Bangladeshi citizenship. They were told you are East Pakistani, so you go back. Pakistan washed its hands off them, said it's your problem, not ours. So these people remained have till date, the older generation, have remained stateless in Bangladesh. So some of the younger generations, I think very few, have been given citizenship now by the Dhaka High Court. So I'm looking at it as now Bangladesh is also going to perhaps do the same. It is your problem. Do what you want to do with this issue. Don't bring it to us. So this is how I see the issue as of now.
I'll just come in here once. Earlier I could not place my opinion on CAB. CAB as such, it is opposed to the nail in the state of Nagaland, and also the entire northeastern states. We are against this CAB. Naturalization of citizens on the basis of religious consideration. I think this is against the principle of the Indian Constitution. At the same time, we want to preserve the secular principle of the Indian Constitution. Another thing is who are illegally settled in the state of Nagaland or elsewhere cannot be just naturalized by one act. This is, and then this will override all our existing law, protective law, whether it be land or it be the protection to our culture, tradition, and the people. All this will be override. This will not be able to survive if CAB comes. This is our fear, and we will not allow this CAB, at least in the Northeast, we will not allow this to happen.
I hear that. But that's a very good point that you made. Although I do want to bring to Sangeeta's notice, and it's in your book actually, that in 2014, during the campaign trail, the Prime Minister did say, when he was campaigning, that upon election of our government, those Bangladeshis bag and baggage, unko wapas jana padega. No, but nobody has gone, so either they're not there or, you know, it's a different thing. Okay, so please ask your questions, make your comments, just identify yourself and make the comments and questions brief, please.
Another quick addition I want to make to that also. During the 2014 campaign, he also said that we will close down all the detention centers in Assam, but it is during his time now, number is going to go up to 10.
Development. I had one question. You mentioned, Sangeeta ma'am, that there is a contradiction between 6A and 3 of the Citizenship Act. So I wanted to ask you, there are two questions actually. The first one is that 6A says that there has to be a detection whoever comes after 1971, and detection of a foreigner. They use the term foreigner, and they say that the detection has to be done according to the Foreigners Act of 1946. So Foreigners Act of 1946 defines foreigner as somebody who is not a citizen of India. And as far as the rule of interpretation goes, Section 3 is a general clause, whereas Section 6A is a specific clause. So I think a specific clause overrides a general clause. So this is my first question, is like, how do we deal with that? And the second question is that, a very small question. So we have categories like D-voters since 1997. We have people whose claim is pending before Foreigners Tribunal. They are certainly not Indian nationals. Their nationality is indeterminate. So are they de facto stateless? That's the second question.
See, to take the first question, why I brought this in is because this is a question yet to be decided by the 5-judge Constitution bench. It is not yet, has not yet overridden, overruled Section 3 yet. Why? That is the reason why I pointed out also that the CJI took into consideration one of the sections of one of the clauses of the Section 3, which said that if one parent is illegal immigrant, then the child will not be considered an Indian citizen. So that's why they've been kept out of the NRC, even though the NRC is being updated as per 6A. So that is one thing. So it is yet to be decided. And what was your other question? Oh, okay. Yeah. See, that is what, the de-voter thing is another thing that has happened in Assam. And you have to go through, again, the process of the tribunals. Okay. So yes, to an extent, they're, because their voting right is taken. So they're not voters of the country. So so if you look at it from one angle, of course, they remain stateless, then they are already getting so many other rights, but not the voting right. But this also, goes to, this passes to a lot of communities. It is not that only a Muslim thing. There are a lot of Nepalis, a lot of Assamese, a lot of Karbi missing, the tribal community who are actually out of these lists. They are in the de-voter list. So when we look at this, compare this whole thing into the Rohingya thing, then it's a Hindu-Muslim thing, it's a communal thing. So that is what I'm saying, that I don't agree specifically to this because of the similar background and pre-partition, but very different background on the post-partition. And there's a very important element there, rebelling against the state. There is no rebellion here. So that is what the comparison was.
Is inspired from European nationalism, like one caste, one language, one region. So, sir, do we really need any nationalism? Or if we need nationalism, then what will the ideal nationalism? Thank you, sir.
What is the alternative? That's what you're saying. So Modi say alternative kya hai? Don't speak. We don't have alternative, man, kind of argument. Now, I don't want to fall into that trap. So I'm not responsible for giving you the alternative. I'm only saying that what is available, what's the problem with that, how it is being done. But globally speaking, it's a problem, so people have been handling it. Okay, so German chancellor can come up and say multiculturalism is dead. I know and some people say we need to move out of the, we have to move out of the EU and all. Remember Margaret Thatcher saying that EU will fail because nation state is more organic and it's true. You can't have an overriding structures beyond that. It's been going on. So one possible framework has been suggested, has been something called civic nationalism. Respect the right of the individuals, the foundational principles, respect communities, okay? And based on a right. So that is the antidote to this culture. India has been selling this liberal image of secular, blah, 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 but I feel it in my writings. I call this one in that essay, it's a multicultural posture with a monocultural thrust. Article 351, I call it impulse. I deliberately use this word carefully. There's an impulse of a cultural imagination. That's what I meant. Nehru had the Freudian slip. Right wing were more upfront. We think that we got our independence, this nation came into being through peaceful means. You are just bluffing yourself. Partition violence is one of the extreme violence which is married to the very process of making the nation in this part of the world. Operation Polo, what Walter Benjamin calls it, violence to institute order. India had used it in the form of Operation Polo in Hyderabad to make this nation state a reality. You know it, Sundarlal Committee report has been almost forgotten. How many people were slaughtered during that operation in that part. We keep quiet on what happened in Kashmir. We send an army, but we still preach that we come out of a very peaceful process. It's a myth. This right-wing government is at least honest to put it up front. We want nations to be created through violence. Okay? So we use violence. Cut off these people, detain them, send in troops. You do that. Okay, so there are impulses in a nation-state system. So the only antidote to that would be, to my mind, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, only alternative, you have to have a rule of law and civic nationalist project, which in short would mean respect individuals' right and respect groups. This is the hallmark of modernity. that we are taught to respect the other. Okay, so if we lose that, and you try to flatten those things, then we are in a dangerous situation. And you have examples all around. I think so. Alternative is to have this basic foundation of rule of law. You don't tweak the laws. Many things happen, we kept quiet. It's happening right in front of us. Remember that Muller's statement when they came for the socialists. I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't speak out. They came for the homosexuals. I wasn't a homosexual, I didn't speak up. Finally, they came for me. There was no one to speak. When you think what's happened in Kashmir, you think the entire constitutional structures is the governor representative of the state or the elected legislative assembly. In Westminster model, what happens? You play around with law. Law, I know law, there is a theory called law as interpretation, Ronald Dawkins and stuff like that. All those debates between Hart and Fuller's arguments. But remember that. It's happening right in front of us. What happens to other can happen to you. Remember that. This state has a flag, isn't it? I don't know, it's not officials. Nagas have flags. Don't make full of people through rhetorics, and somehow it's a post-truth society. And I don't know, what is that French philosopher who writes on bullshit? There's a famous essay called On Bullshit. It's available, so. There's a distinction between liars and bullshitters. Liars respect truth, that's why they're lying. Bullshitters don't respect truth. They can get away with whatever they say. So many things we're hearing. So there is a global trend about post-truth, about media and so on. So we are trapped in that one. So if you think that what kind of society, alternative, there are multi-dimensional way to think about it. But one principal thing that I am saying right now would be, let's not fall into this trap of false truths or post-truth world. Don't abandon civic nationalist project. If you remove that, it will be very, very brutal, and it will affect you. It may begin with the other, it will come to you at that.
Thank you. That was very powerful. It's not tolerance we need respect. I mean, that's the critical difference. Okay. Yes.
Sir?
I'm recognizing you. Yeah. And just want to look at who the others? Who are the others?
So, my name is
Just
Parthu.
wait. Let me see. Let me have a show of hands. Who are the others? Yourself?
Entire citizens, entire populations are mobilized. But Foucault, in his introduction to Gilles Deleuze's work, defined fascism as something that becomes deterritorialized and that becomes embedded within every individual. And the resistance against fascism has to be fought on that individual levels. So when we view Assam, historically, there were instances like the Nelly massacre and the other entire Ahomya movement, when there was no nationwide fascist approach, but fascism can be said to be embedded within the Ahomya people. And also there is the genuine concern of the indigenous people of Assam for their natural rights, their rights of the properties. So where do we take an ethical stance? Because the entire idea of this particularization of fascism has been used by BJP to manufacture a national narrative. So where do we take that stance, the ethical stance of what is right?
Foucault's principle, his comment is not only on fascism per se, it flows from his theory of power, right? It's a disciplinarism, it is his theory on subjectification. If you see, the self and the collective have never been so intrinsically embedded in the modern times in human history. It's part of everything, it's like disciplining you, it's coming from within. So but I think beyond Foucault, I can tell you one thing. This is my principle, and I try to practice it. Today I was asked in a college, aren't you scared the way you speak? I said, I confront that fear. It's not that I'm not a fear. I'm not scared. I am bloody scared. That's why I'm speaking. If I'm not scared, I won't speak. You get it? So at the core of resistance is the moral agency of the individuals. You may choose to die and get shot. Remember that Hannah Arendt's example. If somebody keeps a gun in your head, and asks you to do certain things, and you think, I have no option. It is related to her overall take on Eichmann's trial, if you remember, there's her. She says, it's not a question of no choice. You have a choice, either to do it or get shot. It's a choice. Japanese kamikaze pilots choose to die. Young men, Indian Army officers, they choose to die. So death is a choice. What that guy is doing, according to Hannah Arendt, is that he is only tempting you to choose one over the other. It's not an absence of choice. As long as you are a human being, you have the moral agency. So the resistance should come to my mind. Do not look a particular party to resist first. In your own sphere, recover yourself, resist it from yourself, your own cause within. Death will come. Ghus ke marna, everyday death is something that you can choose or you can reject. There's a saying in Manipuri which I often like it. It says, no mada pokpa machana nini siva unade. Okay? It says, the man who is born once will die only once. If you're born on one day, you will die on one day. You will not die 2-3 days. So if you constantly been tormented and you dying every moment of it, it's far better you confront it. You get it? So that my answer would be a very political and ethical one. You're asking for the ethical prep. This is the ethical. As long as we're human beings, we have moral agency. We make choices. So you resist that one. And that's the same thing in broadly spectrum. Do not abandon, respect the other, civic nationalist project. That's one part of the world that you need. It comes from within.
I just wanted to add something. You talked about Nelly. I would be very careful, first of all, in using certain words, fascism, embedded in the Assamese nationalist movement, embedded in the Assamese people. I would be very careful about categorizing a people as fascist. It does not come easily to a student, surely, and a research student, pardon me. I covered Assam as a reporter for the New York Times in '83. I've seen all those massacres. And Nelly wasn't the only one. There was Salkwa Sapori, there was Goreshwar, there was Gohapur, and different communities were targeted by different groups. There was no, everybody was at war with somebody else. You can't fit a theory into this. It's very difficult. Everybody is in conflict. I remember in Gohapur, first the attack came from the Barooah community on Assamese farmers. The students mobilized and drove them 60 kilometers into Arunachal, shooting them as they went. How do you describe that? So these things go beyond theory and percepts of ideas which can be developed as theories. This is life on the ground. And when I saw Nelly, I was walking through the fields and we didn't see many bodies, and I was telling my guide, what is this massacre you're talking about? He said, we crossed the stream and you will see. So we crossed the stream, we walk up, and I saw a sight I shall never forget for the rest of my life. At my feet was a body of 7 laid out. The youngest from the parents to the youngest was probably an infant of about 3 or 4 months, and he was beheaded. And I looked beyond, and in one field I counted 400 bodies. Okay? That does something to you. This is not theory. This is how it affects you as an individual, and then you are at a point, a cusp of change. You decide what is it that you want to live for? What is it that you want to do that will make sure such a thing doesn't happen again? My daughter wasn't born. She was born a few months later, and I said, whatever I do in my life, it must be in whatever small, insignificant way, it must be to prevent such horrors from happening. It doesn't matter who got killed. It mattered that it happened. That is where lives make a difference, not theories. And I put that to you, that thinking about these things, think about what he was talking about, the person on the ground. That is what makes a difference to everything in your life and to other people's lives. Sangeeta.
Quickly want to add one more thing here, when that Nelly's been mentioned. We look at Nelly also in the the mainstream narrative. Nelly is also often looked at also as a Hindu-Muslim communal thing, but I contradict that. Why? Because if you look at, there are two strong reports, one by the Tiwari Commission and one by the Mehta Commission report. If you read those reports, you will never call it a Hindu-Muslim communal riot. It mentions of things like Assamese were going after the Boros were killing Assamese. Hindus and Assamese Muslims and Assamese Hindus were getting together and attacking Muslims of Bengal origin villages. Bengali-speaking Hindus and Bengali-speaking Muslims were coming together and attacking Assamese villages, and killings and deaths on both sides in the run-up to the 17th February and later. Later, what happens was also, there's not talked about now, but this is there in the Mehta Commission submissions by various witnesses. They talk about how from the helicopters, the certain things were dropped on concrete buildings, because if you go down on the street and down on the ground and burn houses, only the huts get burned completely, not the concrete. So this also is looked at as the government of India's hand and then later. So it is, but why do we look at it as a partition, as a kind of a Hindu-Muslim thing? Yes, of course, the number of people who died were Muslims and very brutally killed in Nelly. But if you look, you cannot forget then Khairabari, where the Bengali Hindus were equally brutally killed, but we don't talk about that, okay? So why do we then always look at Nelly? Of course, the numbers were big, so we always refer to Nelly. But we also talk about it as a Hindu-Muslim riot because our idea of a riot is always goes back to partition. But to my mind, this was an anti-migration kind of an riot, and also a riot where people were divided on the lines of who supports that election and who didn't. So this is also one of the important contexts we have to see as a student. You have to really widen your horizon and see that.
I want to say about this, what he said, one part that you must remember, I mean, to due respect to Sanjay, when it's not theory, I mean, it's theory at one level. When you do educations, my principle is, you should have an active conversation between what you read in textbook in your classroom and what you go through, your own experience. When you abandon this conversation, you get an alienated knowledge in you. And where you're too much sure about your experience without having gone through this form of reading, you think that your worldview is the truth. Books and theories enable you to have a reflexive engagement with your own experience. So the form should be an active conversation between letter and the life. All right. So in that sense, for example, Sangeeta is saying, I have said this before also, riot is a euphemism. Okay? To justify often and forget what had actually happened. In Ashish Nandi's term, is a beautiful way of capturing what happened in partition. He said, what had started as a riot in Calcutta ended with genocide in Punjab, in 46 to 48, this range. But these terminologies are meant to suggest certain kind of nature of the war. When you say riot, you have a very different kind of thing. If I say Gujarat pogrom versus Gujarat riot, it implicates very different things. When you say Naxalite infested area, infested is a medical terminology. You're looking the phenomenon as undesirable disease-like thing. When he uses the terminologies like flooded, you know what the implication of flooded is. You see, undesirable thing which disrupt your life and so on. You can be submerged, you can die. So the flood is a word. Now, if you are a student of social sciences, then you are aware that these words means a lot. It tries to change the way you understand the world. You shift the world, you have a different vocabulary, things change. Remember Vajpayee Musharraf collapses in conversation. One of the things was in the Indian draft and the Pakistani draft, Kashmiri dispute versus Kashmiri crisis. Indian draft was crisis, Pakistan was dispute. So we say, ki farak penda bhai dispute or crisis mein? It makes a hell of a difference. India wants to claim it as an internal problem. Dispute will require at least 2 people. You see, these are so words using. So if you're active as a student, my suggestion to you is, words are important. It's not only in song. Remember that boy's own song is only words. Words that all I have. Or in Genesis, at the beginning there was word, and the word was with God, and word is God. Freud, why does girls say, I like you, why not love me? What is like and love, you know? So words are important. So, you know, when you learn as an education student, know this and have an active conversation, what you have seen, your experiences. Only then you will understand what it means.
My question is from you. So you mentioned few incidents. One is that, so there has been a demand from the government side to deport 40,000 Rohingyas to Myanmar. And another incident, there has been like exclusion of 19 lakh people from NRCs. Now there is a demand in Delhi or Uttar Pradesh to do NRC. And again, there's a Kashmir issue. So we can assume that there's one particular ethnicity or religion is being targeted. So my question is that, why India is losing its legal framework of dealing with the issues like human rights and cross-border migrations, and going towards more and more nationalistic view of looking into the idea of citizenship? So,
Bimol, you want to handle this?
I'm not going to comment on that. But, you know, I think it is a real problem because we are signatories, we are one of the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In fact, the entire segments on race and on women, gender, were drafted by India way back, over 70 years, nearly 70 years ago. So I think there is a fundamental problem in the way we are approaching these issues. Because these people haven't come overnight. They've been here for a very long time. Now, part of the problem is how they are defining themselves. Some of them have defined themselves as Bangladeshis. Some of them have defined themselves as Rohingyas. Many of them have UNHCR certification. And the government has all these details. But they want to pick up, I think, the fact that many of these people are seen as potential, shall we say, security threats. And, you know, they're easy to target for the security agencies. They're very visible wherever they are. And they're documented. You know, it's not as if they're not known. And they've been around for some time. So I think there is a problem really with the way the government has tried to deal with this issue. I think that it would have been far better to accept the UNHCR certification and go on that basis. Because what we are doing now is every few days, some 7-8 Rohingyas are being sent back. They were initially in jail when they crossed over from Bangladesh or from Myanmar, and they're being sent back after they've completed their term. When the information we got initially when these reports of them being sent back to Myanmar came up is that many of them didn't even know what they were going back to. You know, so one of the principles of refugee repatriation is not just non-reforma. There's also what is called common law. The common law is that you do not send somebody back to a situation where he or she may face acute threat to their lives. And that unfortunately was not determined, and they were not informed of the situation before they were sent back. So we are not sure what the status of those people are, because once you go back there, it's difficult to pursue.
This is also happening to the Chins of Myanmar also. They're not wanting to go back, but the United Nations and everyone saying now that you go back. So this is also happening. And the other thing I just want to, you talked about the Rohingyas, in here we may look at it as a very nationalist Hindu government in power, and that's why going after the Muslims. But last year I was in Bangladesh in a place, Khulna, so where the two boys were supposed to come and take me to an event I was attending, and they were late. So after some time they came, and then I said, where were you all getting late? They said, no ma'am, on the way we had to stop because our people caught two Rohingyas. They were, coming out of their camp, that designated area, and they were trying to mingle with us. And we found them, so we just called the police. We bashed them up, called the police, and handed them over. So this is, I'm saying, the same religion, but look how they are being looked as an outsider. So this concept is very much there in different societies, So I'll go back to what Bimol had said, about the dignity of a person, about, respecting others' rights to be. These are very important things that we have to now keep in mind as human beings, as people, whichever country we belong to.
I've got two questions. No one is a question. My first question is to Professor Bimol Akoijam. About 2-3 years ago, there was this dispute in Manipur about 3 amendment bills, in which a couple of cookies also lost. It was like, now when we say that Manipur would like to go back to the situation in 1950, some of the tribes have concerns because they have come out from this side of that side. Now, how do you, as someone who has known Manipur for a long time, how do you think that we can address this issue? Because in between, the Manipuri government also divided some of the districts, and there was strong opposition from the Naga side on this. So, how can we address this concern of the tribes of Manipur about who is indigenous, who is not indigenous? And my question to Theja theory is about, there are a lot of people from Myanmar who have faced persecution, and they have come to the Khemnungan areas, they have come to the Konyak areas. Now, if we have a RIN, what would be their condition? Because see, I was there in the Khemnungan area, in the Kimchungar areas, and people unfortunately mistook me as somebody who has been sent by New Delhi to send back Burmese to their country. And I said, I don't look like a person who's for this job, but anyway, so there are strong concerns already, even before the introduction of RIN. So how will RIN address the concern of these people who've been brought here? So they told me that we have been born here, we've done our degrees here, we've been married here, our children go to school here, and now you want to send us back. But I said, I'm not interested in this. But still, they believe that there is a threat against them, that the government of India may someday want them to go back. So how will your exercise of RIN address their concerns?
Better add him to the RIN list. We've been going
I don't know, you know better. You have been through and through in Nagaland. Nagas, we are in Myanmar, then Manipur, Arunachal, Assam, we are scattered, spread over. This reign is all about Nagaland. And yes, we understand their situation, but that will not give them the status of indigenous inhabitant in the state of Nagaland. But that also doesn't mean that they cannot come and settle. But they cannot avail that status of being an indigenous because they don't hold the ancestral land, and for which they will be classified under another section, maybe domicile, maybe a non-Naga indigenous in the state of Nagaland. There are different yardsticks. So I think this kind of discrimination or those who come helpless out of situation doesn't mean that we will drive them away. But we have to identify them and we have to understand them. Then only government will work out in what way we will tackle their situation. This is all about identification.
I just asked one more question. So the Gaon Budha or Pungro has to identify that this person, this Yimchungar person has come from outside the state. Now the Gaon Budha or Pungro does not identify him. I mean, if he says that this person is an indigenous inhabitant of Pungro village, then the Nagaland government cannot do anything then. Because
we are proposing that there has to be a native village. Nagaland is all about village. Every village is independent. And then we function differently. Our customary law and practices all are different from one village to another village. So there is no uniform law. That is why when we say customary law, we have to go according to tribe and that community. So that is the reason why we have to identify which are the native village in Nagaland. So the commission now is proposing that those who have come and of the village, those will form prior to the state formation, cut-off year 1963. Those should be the native village. And those native village should be responsible to identify who are indigenous. And those persons who fail to be identified by those native village will not be indigenous. And government is not going to give any stricture that those who don't fall under this category will be done away. Government says that once we identify, then we will work out in what way we will bless them. We will tackle their situation.
You know, since we're discussing, it's important for us to reflect. Just like before directly addressing you, I want to address the listening to this thing, you know, and Sangeeta is here and he's dealing with these human rights issues. One of the global problems, remember Syrian crisis, the child refugees photograph. Globally, whether it's deportations, the one we're talking about, this whole issue of addressing whether the nation state has to be opaque. You know, Trump is building walls, and you know, Merkel is saying that we can't take any more. Some countries are opening up. It's a general global phenomena that we have to address that cannot be resolved at the local level all the time. Since the emergence of the nation state system, the question to be asked is what happened to human movement with this new order that have been, this is around about 200, 300 years old. One of the critical, that's why I flagged up the issue with Hannah Arendt's notion on refugee as a figure that exposes that human right, universal human right, is actually a citizen's rights. There's nothing universal about it. The other way of arguing is that in fact the word universal in that 1948 declaration did not qualify human rights, but the declaration itself. So the declaration is universal, not human rights. So it's not universal declaration of human rights. It's not the declaration of universal human right. The executive, if you really looked at it. So this has been some of the issues that people have been debating on that. So if the push and pull factor in migrations, then it's a global responsibility also to address what makes people move out from certain areas, whether it is persecution of a religious kind or economic crisis or whatever. So there should be a global mechanism to address this. Only then, we can also look within each nation state, and then within the nation state is specific set. What is, if I have to give, I'm not trying to take over Sangeeta's responsibility, but I just wanted to remind you that Assam, Kashmir, all this seeing, in even the federal structures, there's an asymmetry. Different law exists in India. There's no uniformity in law. And it is in line with the historical specificities as well as the local specific experiences. That, like you can be a non-Khamoshiyan national citizens, but you can be an Indian national citizen. Assam is part of that. Paradoxes happens. You have a flag, one is an officially recognized flag, one is not. Even I know in literature, mother Kannadika, a notion of mother is there in poetry. It's very few. Remember that Bharat Mata emerges as Banga Mata first. In Bengal, it translated to Bharat Mata then. So we need to know historical specificities about this. Once we understood, then you will understand. Once our analysis begins somewhere here, then we don't check the category, then you have a problem. So the Churan Champur incident, I'll tell you, there are reasons why this was flare up in that part. People will still refuse to accept that, rarely 8% of the total area of Manipur is what we call valley. Rest of them are hills. Anywhere in the world, Meiteis are confined to certain kind of a valley by the British. It's not like this. Before pre-British era, Meitei goes up and settles and forms villages as tribal moves from the top to another top up to the Therieh regions. Movement have been happening. It was British who stopped that one. So Manipur is essentially a hill state. In global definitions, if you have your myth of origin in the hill and your very ecological landscape of survival implicates the hill, how do you stop them from settling in the hills? That's been an anomaly. Manipur is the only case. So even in folklores and in rituals, you have Manipur's Meiteis, for example, I come from there. Kogru is in Senapati. This is why they said where the first settlement happened in their origin myth. Now the British have said that you are not supposed to go there and settle there. So this is an anomaly in Manipur situation. You must understand. The notion of tribe and non-tribe in Manipur is also a dicey one. It's a Western category which is broad. Take Sir Lyell's statement. How did this civilization, oasis of civilization, this is what they call Meitei Valley, amidst, what is the expression? Naked, savage, barbarian tribes. This is the imagery of the Vikings and the southern Mediterranean civilization in a European model of there's barbarians and attacking civilized southern part of Europe. So their categories often planted and started mapping out in different parts of the world, and we internalize it. In India, in sociology and anthropology, you have this caste, how it is a creation of census, Bernard Cohen's work on that, Nicholas Dirk's works on that. We know that how Western categories became a prism through which we understand ourselves. So Manipuris suffer from this. So the idea of hill and valley divide is very much, in some sense, a part of these modern categories, civilized and uncivilized. And 1951, civilized become general category. They become scheduled tribe. Then it's made religious wall aa gaya. There are more Meitei Christian than some of the tribal Christians. You remember that? So this, as he said, pictures are more complicated when you talk about namely violence. Manipur issues are different. So coming back to this, based on this historical trajectory, the idea of land, that I cannot buy land or settle in the hills because I am not a tribe, there is a resentment about this. Initially, when your population is less, when you don't move around, you don't border. Now you border. Why Churan Champur in that one? So it's a tinkering of land ownership. Land annihilation, Meiteis are happening. The actual percentage of land holding by the majority Meitei is less than 3% of the entire state of Manipur, where they are the dominant community. 3%. Think about that. Now, in the name of being a general, you can't buy land, there's youth, anything you do is look with suspicion. People say, oh, hill valley divide and stuff like that. Huh? Now, Churan Champur, why? Along with this, the crackdown in Burma on Chin rebels, lot of people move in Manipur. One. To post-Kuki Naga classes, many of the Kukis were driven to this area, Churan Champur. Now there, if you started trying to do NRC kind of thing, they will be the first one to be alarmed. And they have seen the numerical part of the politics. Why NSA and IM crackdown has enabled them to it, because we need to consolidate number. Otherwise we'll have problems. In that area, that's why you have the maximum flared up is this fear. So I'm saying that this whole notion of land ownership, tribal, non-tribal narrative over the years, along with this new fear of that area, has led to that now, accentuated by convenient Ibobi's move and foolishness of this civil society organization. They know that this is not going to be accepted by government of India. Ibobi want to shuck off his responsibility. मैंने तो pass कर दिया assembly में, government of India, so he's free. Civil society leader, भगवान जाने क्या सोचते वो लोग. You know, I don't know what they think about. If truth be told, this is the fact. I've been asking, did you know that this law is not going to be accepted? Then why did you push? 2 people died and 9 were killed in in this one also. And then all began, like Nelly has become Hindu, Muslim. You realize all the 9s have become martyrs, but you look at police inquiry whether all the 9 died because of that. You will realize some of them were burned trying to steal something. There's reported, they all become martyrs. So we live in this world. So I think overall my take is this one. If you understand the historicity, it's bound to be there.
There's also a martyrs column now in Churchandpur if you go. And another point I want to add to this is also the Métis cannot buy land in the hills, but the other way is possible. Yeah, so that is what.
One interesting thing is, if they buy land, if I sell it to a tribe, another Métis want to buy back.
You cannot, yeah. Same is there in Meghalaya also. You may have been there before the formation of the state, but you have to, when you have to sell land now, like Sanjoy, I think, has a house in Shillong, he will have to sell it only to a Khasi. So there is already various gradations of citizens' rights and there in the Northeast, various micro-level citizens.
Vikas wants to close, and I will just make a few sentences as closing remarks and then give it to you, Vikas. Sorry, you'll have to stand for a minute.
No, fine.
But thank you for inviting us. Thank you all for being so patient and listening. And I think I'm not going to sum anything up because I hope you go back a little more confused than perhaps you came, because you know, it is a complex area, it's a complex region, there are complex issues, and the people are very complex. So, you know, these are issues that need long conversations, and I hope we will keep coming back and confusing you more. Essentially, there are no binaries, there are multiplicities. And please be careful of narratives that paint victims and demonize on the other side. There are victims on all sides, there are demons on all sides, as Bhupen Hazarika would say. And I think the critical thing is that for all of us, we need to uphold rights. We need to embrace and respect diversity. And we just need to be very civil to each other. You know, I think what you described as the, what project did you say? The civic national. No, it's for all of us to do that and to uphold equality. The last point of the last sentence is, for all the issues that we have discussed, there is one madhyam. That is Article 21 of the Constitution. That no person in the territory of India, it doesn't say citizen, no person living in the territory of India can be deprived of his or her life or liberty without due process. That must be at the heart. You must have a constitutional nationalism or constitutional patriotism, not just a blind demand for some of the things that we've been talking about. So thank you all very much, and Vikas.